All right. So it looks like a couple of you have exam today. Probability exam. So they decided to not attend the class. Does anyone still have any questions about recursive functions? Is it like it's still vague concept? No? If you have still any questions, show up in my office hours. These hours are yours, so ask me questions in those times. But last time I told you about the for loop and also the while loop. I told you the general syntax for loop. So you have the for statement here, the for keyword, and then you define an indexing variable for your for loop that goes from one begin number to the end. And then the expression here, this one determines the range of this iterator, the variable, the indexing variable. And then this is a set of statements that you want to perform in between, right? So let me give you a quick example. Let's just start with some simple example. Let's say I want to type for I equals -2 to 10, and I want to have this, let's just have it this way for now, and as soon as I type the for header, I type keyboard end right after it so that I don't forget it later on. That's the best strategy. So create the syntax, the complete syntax for the for loop, and then add whatever you want inside the loop. But let me increase the font size first, because decrease the font size for my own use last time. 8. Okay, I should be able to see it, right? So now if I say display I, let's run this and see what we get. ICP test 1. Okay, so you see what happened? It starts from -2 and goes all the way to the last number that you mentioned here. All right. Now, what if I wanted to make it not sequentially within a few steps? So then I could add a skip here. This is called the skip, which means that start from -2, skip the next number, and then go to the second one, and then use that one as the value of I. Then skip the next number, go to the next one, use that value. So if I try this now, with the skips of 2, you see the difference. You get -2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Whereas in the previous version, you got all the numbers. -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, so on. You can do one more cool thing with this. You can reverse the order that you get for the index value. So I could say, go in the reverse direction. Start from 10, take steps of -2, and then all the way to -2. So if I run this now, you get the reverse order, right? How do you get a negative order but with no skips? Just the numbers. Like -10, -9, -8. Exactly, yes. So all you need to do is this. When you're going forward, when you're, for example, going from -2 to 10, you don't need it, because that's a default behavior. So you don't need to add 1 here. But when you're going in the backward direction, then you have to say -1. Okay. Otherwise, it will not work. Let's try it. You see, it does nothing for you. Why? Because it sets I to 10, and then tries to see what's the next number. So 10 is already bigger than -2, so it doesn't do anything. It feels like it has reached the end of the for loop, so it doesn't do anything and gets out, right? Which is a useful behavior sometimes. You don't want, for example, to do something if the beginning value is bigger than something, bigger than the n number, for example. Right. So, but there is another thing about for loops. Let's say we start with this. Oh, that's wrong. It's not going to work. With 2. Okay. So now if I run this, I get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, as I wish. But let's say as soon as I reach 5, I want to quit this loop. I fulfilled my mission, and then I want to quit this loop. I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to continue the rest of the iterations. How do I do that? Any ideas? What was that? Exactly, yes. So we have to put a condition here now. So I say if I equals 5 and break. Or I could also, I think, as far as I remember, could also put it all in the same line. Okay, this should also work. Yeah. So you see now the loop doesn't go up to the end to 7 and 9. It finishes before reaching 7, right? Now let's say I want to do something else. I want to skip the first 3 numbers and only print, yes?
I was wondering, can you use the break in the recursive function?
Yes, of course. No, with the functions, the keyword that returns the handle to the parent function or the parent environment, it's return. So whenever you want to break the function and get out of it, you have to use return statement. And that's what you have used so far. But that's a good question, yes. But you cannot use return in a for loop. So there is break, and there is another statement, which I'm trying to tell you right now. So if let's say you wanted to display all the numbers that appear after 5. So how would I solve this problem now? So I'm going to leave this here for the moment. I'm going to say, obviously I have to use an if conditional, right? I have to say if I is less than 5, less than equal to 5, then do nothing, right? So it has to do nothing here, and then it has to skip this display statement. How would I do that? Any ideas, suggestions? You need to know the other keyword. I don't expect you to know, but I'm just wondering. Exactly, yes. So you can put continue here. What it does is that as soon as it hits the continue keyword, it goes back to the beginning of the loop. And it starts over with a different number, with the next number in the list of iterations. Until you get an I value that's bigger than 5, and then that conditional doesn't execute anymore. So it does what you want to do. So now if I press F5, now I get 7 and 9 only. Now what if I remove this original conditional that I had? Now I have 2 conditionals. What's going to happen? It just does nothing. Does nothing. It should. Oh, by the way, so let me see. So the problem, it does actually something. You know, it prints. It does something, yes. So if I change this, because you know what happens, it actually does the same thing as before. Can you say why? Yes.
Well, because you're telling it to stop at 5, but you're telling it to keep going on.
Yeah, exactly. So I tell it continue. Don't execute these 2 statements until you are above 5. But then here the conditional here says if it's equal to 5, then break, which never happens, right? Because we have passed already the number 5. So the correct way of saying it is to make it greater than or equal to 5. Then it's not going to print something for us, anything for us, but it will actually print something. What do you think it will print? with this syntax. It will print 7, yes. So it will only print 7. Now if I remove this and put it before this one, before display statement, then I'm going to get nothing. That's the most wasteful way of writing a code. It does nothing for you. So that said, I think you basically know anything you need to know about for loops. But that's not the only way of creating a for loop. Before telling you the next one, let's try an example. Let's say that you wanted to write the largest prime, you wanted to find the largest prime number that's smaller than a given input number to your function. Okay, so how would you write that? Any strategies? Any ideas how to begin? So let's say the user gives you 121, and you want to find the largest prime number that is smaller than 121. Now you can use for loops. We are done with recursive functions. Yes.
You do a loop that starts at the number, but something that keeps going down, and the
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. So let's try this and see what we get. Why not? So let's write this function. So yeah, you write a function that takes. Let me help you with this. So you write a function. I'm going to create a new file. Function get largest prime. Then it takes an input integer. As soon as I type the header for the function, I type the end keyword so I don't forget it. I just want to tell you one thing about functions and also the general rules for conventions for naming variables in your programming. So basically, you're free to name any object in your program, in your programs, in your codes, whatever you want. But if you do, always try to come up with a set of rules for yourself that you can transfer to your audience or the users that you want to use your code, and so that it helps them understand the structure of your code. For example, if you always start the functions with a capital letter, then always do so in all of your codes, right? This is not a good behavior. So most often, if you go, for example, to C++ language, you will see rules like this. These are not programming. These are not the program standard rules. These are just user-defined rules, the programmer's rules, own rules, conventions that they use in order to clarify what each object is. For example, a function always does something for you, right? So it performs some action, a set of actions, right? So it's always good idea. It's always a good idea to start function names with verbs, not with a name, right? So for example, this function is going to find the largest prime, right? So I always most often start my functions with the verb get, right? So as soon as I see the verb get, I understand that this is a function. This is not a variable, right? So when I want to call this function on the command line, as soon as I see get, I understand that it's a function. Because just by convention, my own convention, I always use a verb at the beginning of a name of a function, right? So you could also name it largest prime. That's also fine. But if largest prime is defined within the workspace, I would have no way to understand if largest prime is a number. What is it? Is it a logical variable, or is it a function, a script, or what? Right. So in MATLAB, it's not really that significant. But if you go to other languages, it becomes significant. Especially in C++, if you see like variables have names that are a sentence, right? It starts with a name and then it ends with the verb at the end. So it's just a full sentence. And the function names are most often like a verb at the beginning and then some explanation after that. And then, for example, if you have, again, this is not the rule in MATLAB, but for other programming languages, it's good to define these sets of rules. For example, MATLAB doesn't follow this syntax to capitalize constants in the programming environment. So if you type pi here, using lowercase, it's going to work. It gives you the constant pi, right? But if I type pi, it doesn't understand it, right? But again, that's a general convention. If you go to other languages, it's always good to write constants all in capital letters, right? So that you, as soon as the user or the next developer sees your code, it understands that pi is a constant. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is, what's the purpose of it, but whatever it is, it's a constant number. It's not going to change its value, right? So that helps a lot in understanding your code. And again, the functions start with the verb. And for example, there are also other rules. So if you search for example, Google C++ syntax, or just search for general conventions in MATLAB or any other language that you want, you should be able to find some consensus on how to define the variable and function. And then, for example, what I do myself most often, again, not so much in MATLAB, but in other languages, is that if I have a scalar variable that contains only a single value, I always start the name of the variable with something that is not a verb, and it's also lowercase character. So let's say, for example, I want to define a prime number. I say my prime, something like this, right? If this my prime is a vector or a structure, then I started with a capital letter, my prime. And if you need to have multiple words in your variable name, it's all fine. Try to be as expressive as possible. Don't shorten the name of the variable, because that will make it really difficult even for yourself to later on understand what you wrote a few days ago. Right? So what I do is that I write the words one after the other, but when there's a separation, instead of using underscore, I use capital letters. So I say my prime number. Okay. So based on my own conventions, my own programming conventions, I understand that my prime number, the first letter is capitalized, so it's a structure or it's a vector, and then it's about prime numbers. That's it. And now if I have a verb at the beginning of this, get my prime number, as soon as I see the get verb here, I understand that this is a function, it's not a variable. All right? So that's it. I've been trying to tell you this since 3 weeks ago, but I keep forgetting about it. Okay, let's go back to this function. Now we want to write the function that gives us the largest prime number. And let's try it with 121. See what's that number. Whenever you get it, let me know. 121.
Yeah, so like the highest point.
Oh, 113. Okay. So we have got an answer, 113. You could do it in two ways. You could start from the biggest number and then go down until you hit 1. But you will never hit 1 because there is a prime number before hitting 1. But you could also start from the beginning and go to the end, which is the less efficient way of putting it. So how do you do this? I say for I equals 1 to n to 2 negative 1 if I is prime, I display okay. How about this? Should it work, you think? Why wouldn't it stop? Exactly, yes, very good point. So I have to have a break here. I don't like the syntax. Let's just do it the traditional way. Then I should have a break here. Right. Let's say I wanted to find all the prime numbers smaller than this number. What kind of change I should make to this function then? What was that?
Don't have the break.
Yeah, we could just remove break or say continue instead of break. Now, if I call it again with the same number, I'll get a list of primes. That's really cool, right? So, you could still make your function more efficient. Do you know how? Yes?
Why is the jump -1?
Because we want to go through all the numbers smaller than this number, right? But again, it's not. It can be made more efficient. What do you think? What kind of changes did we make to this function to lower the cost of this call? It could be actually made half a cost of the current function. Skip the yes, exactly. Skip the even numbers. Yes. Do you have a question? I think so. You should be able. You mean like this?
Yeah, but
I think you could. Let's try it and see if it's possible or not. I rarely use this syntax because there is no reason to scramble everything into just one line. But let's see if this works. I don't think. I doubt about this one, but let's see. You see, gives no. I'm sorry. This is a function call. It works. Okay. Sounds good. Yes.
and MATLAB is using the function is prime the homework, right?
Is prime, yes. Is prime is from, no, is prime is a built-in MATLAB function. Yes. So the one that we wrote was is capital prime. That follows my own conventions for naming functions, right? And if you look at MATLAB functions, not all of them, but at least the logical ones, always start with a verb, which is, right? So is prime, is number, is numeric, is real, and so on. Okay. Now that said, what else did I want to tell you about this? Oh, here's another thing that I want to let you know, and then we can start on working on homework, some challenging problems. So, you don't need to have, in place of the expression, the iteration list, you don't need to have specifically a set of numbers, right? So you could also have a vector or a cell array here. And what this does for you is that it iterates over all the members of that vector for you. So if I run this now, how many iterations should I get from this script? How many iterations of the for loop? I know the answer myself now. 6, right? So what this script does is that index is set to 1 in the first iteration, and then this display function displays the class of the index, which is, what is it? The class of index. What is the class of index? It's a double, right? Because no. See, index takes only one element of the vector A at each time. So in the next iteration, index is set to 0. Next iteration it's 2. Next iteration is 3, 7, negative 1, right? And then the next line displays the value of it. So let's run this and see what happens. Yes? That's what you get. You see, all of it are double, and then the value right after it. Now, you don't need to have a vector necessarily. You could make it a cell array. This would also work. But notice the difference. So with the previous one, we had double. So every member, every index value was a double, right? But now if I run this iterator over the cell array, then you get something different as a class, right? So why does this happen? Why do you get this cell class for index? Basically, what happens is that you're using the box that corresponds to the first cell member in this cell array. So this first one is not the value. What this for loop takes is the cell member, is the cell element itself, not the content of it, right? So what it does is that it, when you say display index, it displays the cell, not the content of it. That's why you have the square brackets around it, right? So it's iterating over the cell members of this cell array, not its values, right? So you could make it even more complex. Now I could have, for example, a nested cell, something like this. Is good question. Normally what I do is that I rarely use this syntax myself. So what I do is that, for example, here, I say A equals ALEN equals length of A, and then I say 1 through ALEN display what is the class of A index. This should now work. Display A index, right? I suspect there might be another way, but I'm not sure, because what you do, so let's see what this one gives us. So if I use this notation, I'm not sure if it gives us an error or, well, I think it gives you a comma separated list. So it might work. We can try it and see. I have never tried it myself because it rarely happens, but let's try this. Instead of using this current form to get the values inside of the cell element, let's see if this one works. If we can iterate over, I think it will not, but we can try it and see. Okay. You see, it gives an error. So it doesn't work. Expected output from a curly brace or dot or something. What we could do is probably we could just put this around it, which again makes it a cell array, which is pointless because we already had a cell array there. It may not even work, or it worked apparently, yes. So the only way at the moment that I know is this. That's what I do myself. You define the length of the cell array, and then you go from the first element to the last element, and you fetch the content of each element by using the curly bracket syntax, right? Now, things could get more complex, so you have to be careful when you're using a cell array instead of the list of values for the iteration in for loop. So, let's say this is the, let's define a 3x3 matrix. Let's define it manually. So I say this is the first row, this is the second row, and then how about the third one? I say 4, 5. what is A now? It's a 3 by 3 matrix, right? Now, what would happen if I use A in place of iterator for X? The iterator list for X, for index, I'm sorry. So what's going to happen now? How many iterations do you get? Run it yourself, guys. Try it and see what you get. How many? You got 3?
Yeah.
Okay. So why does this happen? Try it yourself and see if you get the same answer or not. And then can you come up with an explanation why this happens? You all get 3? Well, how many? Well, how many? Error. Okay. So maybe, are you sure that you have a 3 by 3 matrix? Or it's also fine if you have 3 by 2 matrix. Or 3 by any number of rows, yes.
So whenever I try to do display class of A with early bracket one index,
Oh, I'm sorry. So we have to, because now it's a vector. So I apologize. So we should remove this. And this should not be A anymore. This should be index. Okay. So if I remove these and then make it a class of index and display index, then this should work. Try this and see what you get. Yes.
Just like
Exactly. Yes. If you recall, I told you many times that MATLAB is a what is it? Is it a row-wise or column-wise? Column-wise. What does it mean? It means that it goes in the memory. It stores the elements of a matrix in the memory like a column-wise order. So the first element goes to the memory, the second element in the column, third element, and then the next column. The next column. It also has this rule for iterating over vectors or matrices. So whenever you have a vector, it assumes that you want to iterate over the rows, over the columns, not the rows of the matrix, right? So what happens is that you get the, let's run this and see what you get. So the last set of numbers that is output here, this is just too big, it doesn't show you exactly what happened. So I ran the code and I got double 123 double 074. Double 123 is what? This is a weird case. So how could we get 123? 132. Okay. Yes. My bad. Yes. So it prints 1 and then prints the second element in the column and then the third element. So what it does is that this is A. So when you say iterate over this matrix, it iterates over the columns, not over the rows or the members, right? And that's the same case with cell arrays. So if you define this to be a cell array, then it's going to iterate over the columns of the cell array. So it gives you 3 indices, three index values, right? And each value is a vector corresponding to the column of the matrix, okay? Now, I think we can, let me tell you about the while loop, and then we can discuss minor details later on. One thing, I normally use the variable I and j myself in any language as the iterator or the index of the for loop. But keep in mind that I and j have a predefined meaning in MATLAB. What do they stand for? They stand for the, what is it? The complex number square root of -1. right? So if I print j, I have already redefined I to be something else because I use it as a for loop index. But if you try j, it should give you a square root of -1, which is this complex number. All right. So you have to be careful. I rarely use complex numbers in my own calculations, so it's all fine for me at least to use I in my codes. But if you happen to use complex numbers, which you are going to use a lot throughout your program, then you have to be careful not to redefine INJ or never use MATLAB built-in INJ as a representation for the complex numbers. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then gonna skip this one. Let's try this problem number 3. And one of you, I remember now, Jack, are you here? We probably have a probability exam today. So we have two problem 6 in this homework, which I will fix it. Okay. So now we have about 10 minutes. Let's solve this problem in class together and see if you can get the correct answer. That's homework number 4, problem number 3. So we have a nested cell vector which contains this set of letters. So what you do is that you need to copy and paste this into your MATLAB code, MATLAB environment to define the variable list. And then you're supposed to write a script that extracts each of these letters using a for loop and then puts them all together in a single sentence and displays the message. Right, let's try this, and if you have any...
Is it a function?
You could write it as a function, yes. Or you could write it as a script, it's also fine. What does the question ask you? MATLAB script, so it doesn't need to be function. So you define this variable at the beginning of your script, and then you write a for loop structure that extracts these letters for you. So this will be the format of this script if I wanted to write it myself. The name of the script is extract letter. So save this as extract letter. And this is the list itself. And now the goal is to write a for loop that extracts each of these letters and puts it together in a single line to create this. So how do you think you should try to answer this question? How many loops do you think you would need?
As many as there are.
As many as the number of nested cell arrays, right? Because this is a nested cell array, meaning that it's a cell array, it's a set of cell arrays inside of a cell array, right? So you have to iterate over the 2 cell arrays to extract each one better.
That is part you can turn into an array. So then by turning that into an array and then adding the previous one, you now have one long array, they turn into
The property control for I equals and that is for J. So J is for I, that would like each individual letter is that one cell. So like when you say I is the list, it will find this whole cell. And that's the and then when you say J is equal to I, it's going to go and find each cell.
One thing that you could do, you could approach this problem two ways. You could get the size of the list variable and then say for I equals 1 to the size of this list variable, the length of this list variable, and then get the content of each element, right? You could also iterate over list variable and say for element equals list, then each element is going to be the one cell element of this list array. And then you use that to loop again over this element of the list. You see what I meant? So two ways. You can get the length of the cell arrays and then loop over them, or you can just loop over the cell, just like the syntax that I told you. Right?
Why doesn't this work?
Okay, so don't use Python syntax in MATLAB. That's a Python syntax. It says add a string together, but in MATLAB, string concatenation is not addition, which is counterintuitive because it's very natural, right? So if you have two vectors, you could just basically what happens is that when you say Amir plus, I don't know, Jack. This is what you're doing, right? So when you say Mir plus Travis, it's going to give you an error because these two are not vectors of the same size, right? So you have to be careful with this. So how do you concatenate the strings? If I want to concatenate strings, Amir and Travis, then this is what I would do. But you have to keep in mind, when you put these two together next to each other, then if there is no space between them, they will stick together. Right? So if you want a space between them, or a semicolon, you have to add a comma. That's what you have to do. Right? Now, you want to put these letters next to each other without any space between them. Without any white space. So all you need to do is to extract those elements and just put them next to each other, just like this. So MA and M here. That's what you get. So if I want to define, so I can now say answer contains this MA, right? Now I can say answer equals answer concatenated with a new letter. So look at this. So now I have answer equals mat. I want to add to this answer, which is mat already, the next letter. You see? Yeah. You can create the word that you want.
It's subindex area. Now that
Subindex. Okay. So no. See. You haven't defined J yet, or did
I did right there.
Okay. So then you don't need these anymore. So you have to just say yes, J.
J.
Let's try the green chisel. It did, right? Unless it iterated over what you wanted to.
It's giving B to this.
But so you have to say J curly bracket 1. Because you want the content of it, right? Not the not
oh yeah.
J curly bracket. Yeah, I think this would work now. Yeah.
Not exactly what I want.
What's the value of this string now?
It's net original starts.
Yeah, that's the type of string str on the command line. So what? It's accelerate. Okay. You're getting accelerate again. What is the class of J? Type class of J. So, but you're asking for right? So, what is the type J and see what you get? So 1 by 20, okay. But there's something wrong with this. What is I then?
I is, it would be that.
Yes. I'd say comment this line first, and then print J, the value J, at each iteration. Just to see if the loop working fine is not. So,
Yes.
what do you get?
Oh, I see. So sometimes, if you try this, that you redefine answer each time within a for loop, and add a new character to this variable, what's happening is that you're adding one element to the size of this vector, right? So basically, you're changing the length of your array, your vector, at every loop. And this is really costly. So with the small codes, you don't have any problem with this. But each time, basically, what's happening in MATLAB mind is that each time you add a new letter, MATLAB destroys the current variable, puts the content of it into another variable first, and then destroys it, and then creates a new variable that is one letter bigger, and then puts back the original content plus the new letter, right? And this is really costly. So if we knew somehow at the beginning how big of an array we need, then that would be wonderful. We could just pre-allocate it and say, set the size of this vector to this specific size I want, and then fill it with the number. Right. Exactly.
From the beginning.
Exactly. But with this problem, we can't really tell it unless we just run a for loop over this cell array list and get the count of all the cell members, and then you can predefine your string, pre-allocate it, and then do another for loop to fill the content of it. But since it's just a simple problem, it's not a big deal, so you can ignore it. Yes. So I'll see you next time. We'll discuss more and more. Now, first thing you want to do is make sure that you get the elements that you did. So you would say, display this, curly bracket, curly bracket.
You know, we're the guys like, you know what I'm talking about. You know, right?
Elements of this, right? But each element is another layer, right? So you don't have to create over this. What you do is that you say, get the size of this I, and then create another for you that loops over the length of this list I.
Yeah, that happens.
There is a for j equals 1
Well, how do you
is I.
You care.
And then get the content of that.
I care, but I guess I'm not doing enough.
And then
Just like
those letters next to each other. You have to also predefine the string.
and you're trying to have it. But
and then
nothing
still the variables, still the string variable with more letters. Okay. Yeah. So we can discuss later. Think about it yourself at home. See if you can solve it. And then
as long as I get that internship, and then be like, my GPA is not great, but I have
the problem is that you're again calling on the third bracket. You can move that third bracket there. This is work. No, I mean you don't. Oh, I see. So yes, just remove everything from A. Yes, but what would you set X to this? Because A is already they. The third bracket. But the third bracket is because it doesn't work. Does it?
Well, I want to ask to display every single part. So
Yes.
give it out.
So let's run this and see what you get. You don't get it, right? You can expect one output from third line 2. So I told you in class that this syntax doesn't work apparently with MATLAB. That's one of the weird things about MATLAB that I said the last time. That some things don't work that you naturally expect to work, but it doesn't work.
So when
Yes.
I run a visit, I only give me that first stuff. I can't get the other stuff, but not the
So what if you remove the colon parentheses now? What if you, no, just remove that. You don't need it. It's just a cell array, right? So it knows it was just a cell array. It was not print everything, right? Yeah.
Let me collect my stuff and then.
I wanted to ask for I reviewed on my quiz